Another combo class bonus live stream? What? Oh, what's that? Is that a rare old blueprint I may have accumulated at a rare old point of my past, unearthed in a box recently? Maybe. Oh, what's that? Is that some rare versions of the actual magic cards I once had that I said I wanted to explain the theory of more, but now I have found some actual old props of. These are some OG old ones. And what's that? Is that some cool equations? Perhaps. Perhaps all those things are happening because we got a bonus live stream and we got a cat visitor. Hey, Sassafrash. Hi, Sass. You want to come here? You good? Hello to everybody who has joined us here. And first, what we're going to talk about today is letting everybody know there is a new main combo class episode out. Make sure that you've caught or that you catch after this stream, linked in the description, the newest episode, which is about kind of this to a degree. This is a unique set of equations we're going to talk about for a moment in the stream. And this got a mention in the episode briefly. We're going to just expand on it today. Won't have too many spoilers in case you haven't seen that yet. But that episode goes into our Fermat's last theorem and beyond questions of general things throughout history that have been pondered. Some of them have been proven, some of them are still open, about ways of adding powers together. And we're going to talk about a few of those, but make sure that if you haven't seen it yet, you catch the main combo class episode. Remember, that's on a different channel, but linked in the description about that at some point soon. Now, the next episode will also be about sort of an unsolved mystery of sorts. People have asked me for a long time, talk about the Collatz conjecture, the 3x plus 1 thing. And yep, we're going to do it because I didn't want to make an episode a grade ago that was just an intro to the Collatz conjecture. I like my episodes, if they're going to introduce a somewhat already relatively known topic, to also go beyond it. And so I kind of waited till I had the right way to go beyond the Collatz conjecture, and the way we're going to go beyond it is looking at its interpretation in bases like binary, and how if we write the strings and chains in it in binary, we get weird, interesting shortcuts. So that's going to be next episode. It will be the Collatz conjecture in binary. Now, there's also, like I said, a fun snack break we're working on. That's another slightly more lighthearted revelation of a conspiracy about the edibleness of peels. Now, thank you to everybody who is leaving hellos and such in our comments so far. After that little intro, the first main thing we're going to talk about is going to be, let's see, of these three, we're going to go to the unsolved mysteries first, and we're going to go to looking at one or two of the math follow-ups to the episode I dropped. Now, note that if you haven't seen it yet, I won't spoil too much. Still worth watching the episode. Now, first I will answer one question that just came in that asked, are we in grade 2 or grade 3? Neither. We are in grade -2, and if you want to be more precise, you could say that we are about 1/4 to 1/3 of the way through grade -2, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the way. Now, I expect a grade will last somewhere around a year, but I also will be dropping episodes at a slightly more frequent rate at later points in the year, and I would say that episode-wise, we are 1/4 of the way through grade -1. I somewhat judge it, grade -2. I sometimes judge it based on the episodes on the main combo class channel, and there were 36 of those in grade -1. And we've done 12 of them in grade -2 so far. So some would say, are we 1/3 of the way through? but I expect we may have 48 episodes this grade, that we may have 4 batches of 12 this time. So episode-wise, we may be just about 1/4 of the way there. Now, in a few weeks, we'll probably be more consistently at our 1/3 mark. We can also note where we're at as somewhere around the negative root of square root of 5. So the square root of 5, is 2 point something, and there is also a negative solution if we're not just looking for the positive number x squared that equals 5, but the negative one as well. We're around there. We'll do a special maybe when we get to grade negative E. Now, moving to these open questions, which, like I said, I won't spoil the episode we did, but we were looking at ways of adding something that's a whole number to another whole power, plus another whole power into another whole power. And most of those cases were about the powers having to be the same, and how it's impossible to add 2 cubes into another cube, and what else is impossible or unknown or possible. Here we get to later in the episode showing some quick bits that don't constrict the powers to have to be the same number. We can now put the powers as different numbers. What is some perfect power plus another that's another? So, for example, 1 to any power plus 2 cubed equals 3 squared. What are perfect powers that add together? Now, we know that there's an infinite amount where the power is 2, and this episode's about if they're all the same and the power's higher, limits that occur. But if they're different, a lot of other open conjectures have emerged. One of which I mentioned, we won't talk about much in the stream, but I mentioned there's a $1 million one. The one called the Beal conjecture that relates to whether, if we have these 2 different powers equaling that, in the cases where they're all at least 3, which this does not have. So a separate question from this. If all the exponents are at least 3, but not restricted to being the same, that the base numbers may need to have a prime factor in common. And if you can prove that the base numbers need a prime factor in common, or find a counterexample where they don't have a prime factor in common, then you get $1 million. And it's not even one of the classic Millennium problems, where 7 problems were given $1 million prize. It's not even that. It's an 8th one of those. Arguably, the Collatz conjecture is a 9th, because that one has a foreign prize on it that, translated into American dollars that the other ones are in, is slightly over $1 million. So there's actually 9 problems that have had a $1 million bounty, one of which is now no longer claimable. It was solved, although not claimed. The Grigory Perelman solved one of the Millennium problems, the Poincaré conjecture, but there are still 8 out of 9, not just 7, like some people think, $1 million questions out there. And next episode about the Collatz conjecture, I better remember to mention, because I get so distracted by the math that I forget that it's a good hook, that it's worth $1 million. So I got to remember to throw in while I'm filming all of, which is mostly filmed already, but I'm still doing bits of the intro, so I'll try and remember to mention as, a sensible hook to viewers who care about money more than me, that this one's worth $1 million as well. Slightly over $1 million in a prize in yen, which is a foreign currency. Now, with this one, this doesn't have $1 million prize. This is a different question, but it's believed that it's possible whenever you have a to the b plus b to the c equals c to the z, when is it possible for the exponents to fulfill this certain equation? For the x, where's a pen that works? For the exponents, we're calling this a to the b, or no, a to the x plus b to the y equals c to the z. Now, let's say we're looking for cases where 1 over x, the reciprocal of that exponent, plus the reciprocal of that exponent, 1 over y, plus the reciprocal of that other exponent we have over there, is less than 1. Now, Pythagorean triples, like 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared, don't work for that, because the reciprocals of all those 2's is 1/2, and 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 is not less than 1. So, from there, we can note what is possible. Well, the conjecture is that this sounds, to a non-mathematician, sounds like a boring conjecture, but it's not. The conjecture is that there's a finite amount of solutions to that. Now, the interesting thing for anybody should be that we only know these solutions. Now, 1 to the m can be any m greater than 6 and have this work. So there's one where 1 to anything greater than 6 plus 2 cubed equals 3 squared is true, and the reciprocals of the exponents are less than 1. So that one gets a variable. All of these are distinct singular cases, and if we count that as a single case, there are 10 that are known. And these are the 10. And so we can see in each case, like, these are true equations, and a fifth plus a half plus a fourth is less than 1. A third plus a half plus a ninth is less than 1. And this is sort of what I wanted to clarify, that I skimmed by this in the episode. But looking at these cases, it's interesting to think, what are ways in which 3 fractions could add up to less than 1? Unit fractions, meaning we have 1 on top and a whole number on bottom. How can we add 3 to less than 1? Well, a good starting point to remember is that a half plus a third plus a sixth is exactly 1. We could also note things like a half plus a quarter is exactly 1. So we got to be under that. We need, like, maybe, a half plus a third plus a ninth, or a half plus a third plus a seventh. But what if you're also trying to make them be the exponents of equations that work in this form? So this, to me, is a quite interesting one. This one has been called the Fermat-Catalan conjecture? Let me double check that it's called the Fermat-Catalan conjecture. Yeah, it's the Fermat-Catalan conjecture, and this one is an interesting problem in math, because it doesn't sound that captivating when you hear, we're trying to prove there's a finite amount. But in math, when you're looking at what things fulfill which properties, between I found a solution or I couldn't, there's other categories too. It's maybe more catchy to say something like Fermat's last theorem or the Collatz conjecture, where it's, are there any solutions or none? But there's also a big distinction in this sort of equation, Diophantine equations in number theory, that is, if there are solutions, are there a finite amount or an infinite amount? So, in this case, we know there's solutions. If we count that as a single one, we know there's at least 10. If we count that m as any value, then we know there's an infinite amount. But not counting this m as a multiple, counting that as a singular case, that there is a finite amount that this could work as. Now, the way that we could calibrate that we're not counting the m's differently is saying the base numbers. The base numbers, if I say, this is A, that's B, that's C, then this takes care of 1, 2, and 3. But we are looking for solutions where we have different base numbers, the exponents add to less than that, and with all the computing power that humans have these days, and all the work put into questions like this, we have been unable to find more than this amount. So, still a question in this case of whether it's in the category of having an infinite amount of solutions or in the category of having a finite amount. Now, reminiscent of when you ask about prime numbers, much easier to prove that there's an infinite amount of prime numbers. But as a ancient mathematician or somebody who didn't read the textbook yet, you may say, I know 5's prime. Are there an infinite amount of these? And so we got to be comfortable with the level of importance beyond none to some. The distinction of when some contains an infinite subset or when some contains a finite subset. Now, some are obvious. Square numbers. Oh yeah, of course there's an infinite amount of those because I could take any natural number and square it. Primes, I wouldn't say it's obvious. I would say even somebody who says, oh, it's obvious there's an infinite amount of primes isn't really thinking deeply enough. It's not necessarily obvious unless you spend a few paragraphs in your brain thinking through it. Then it can feel obvious. It can become something very easy to prove and justify. It doesn't take more than, a few equations or a few paragraphs of logic in your head. But it's not necessarily intuitive to the human body that there's an infinite amount of primes. And if somebody thinks it was weirdly intuitive to them, I would almost be a little distrustful of that. That they think that for some reason I don't know. We'll just say that things like that can range in difficulty of proof. And this one is beyond the grasp of currently provable. Doesn't have $1 million prize like the Beale conjecture, but that one will get its spot in an episode someday. I will do an episode before too long before we do a more deep dive into at least the Riemann hypothesis. And we're already doing a deep dive into the Collatz conjecture next week. We'll do a overarching view of the 9 problems currently worth more than $1 million in mathematics. Technically 8 of 9 available. But, if you understand that video well enough, and by understand well enough, I mean understand so well that you're able to write a few 100-page proofs, then you will get $8 million. Too bad I'm not as motivated by money, but I'm a hustler here and there. I've hustled in my day, and to hustle right now, I will remind everybody that we do have a Patreon, and that at some point before this month ends, I'm going to start the thing called memberships on this channel. Done hustling now, and that stuff really helps. It helps us hire people and do cool stuff here. But in general, moving onward, let me take a peek at our comments because we're going to move on to another topic, and let me know if you guys have any thoughts about how you could go further on this problem, because this is one of the slightly lesser known ones in number theory, the Fermat-Catalan conjecture, and I think this one you'd have a better bet at cracking than sinking your teeth into, say, the Collatz conjecture, which, like in my Fermat's theorem episode, I mentioned that they believe that Fermat's last theorem is the mathematical problem that has the most amount of incorrect proofs submitted to institutions. It had some prizes for it back in the day, and there was at least one institution that said they got more than 1,000 wrong proofs submitted trying to get the prize. Now, I would say that the Collatz conjecture would have a good chance of being second. Riemann hypothesis is up there too, but the Collatz conjecture has a good chance of being second in history of most amount of incorrect proofs having been written and sent places. Because I have read plenty of people's thoughts in a few paragraphs about how they have solved one of these things. Be skeptical if you read something less than 50 pages that says it's proved, something like the Collatz conjecture or a shorter version of Fermat's last theorem or whatever. Some of these things that have been so studied over the past 200-300 years are likely going to be solved with like a 100-page proof or something. Fermat's last theorem took slightly over 100 pages. Now, let me take a peek at our comments before we jump into some other topics. Now, Somebody asked about the grade system. Is it like school grades? To a degree, in that they're going to last around a year, although I get to pick when I think we've achieved what we need to achieve with the grade. So if I really want, I can make a grade last half a year or last 2 years. I can do what I want. So it's sort of like a more flexible version of a grade per year. But also, we go backwards. I was thinking, what grade should I call it? If I call it like grade 100 as a joke, or like, I like the idea of making a sort of joke name on the school system. Both because I think I like to mock the school system in certain ways, and because I like school. And I mean, I didn't like going to school, but I like the concept of what school could be. I like learning. And I figured let's go with a half-mocking version of the school system. Take a little inspiration from how their grades worked well as a system of yearly numbered things, and maybe we get to the chance to mock their grades here and there as well. And then I decided, well, if I name it like grade 100 or something as a joke, it sounds like you need to have finished college to get there. Like you got to go super far that way. Maybe I should name it after an unclaimed zone. And yeah, I considered imaginary numbers and such, but I figured there will be a time where some other project makes sense to call grade I, or grade I+1 or something. For now, I realized even the negative numbers, pretty simple concept of naming a negative grade, doesn't seem to have been taken by any big institution. And, you know, kind of like how when I looked that Threven wasn't in any big dictionaries, I was like, well, I better talk about Threven. That's weird. When I saw that, I couldn't do as much about the Threven thing. I don't have control over what words are used, but when I'm naming my own grade, I have a little control over that, and I figured, you know, let's claim the negative terrain. Let's go for grade -1, grade -2. We're going deeper the other direction, so that no matter how many of the positive grades you've done, if it's 10 or 15 or what, you can now go backwards, maybe during your other grades or after or before or whatever. You can go backwards with me. And so we are going to be going to grade -3 at some point, grade -4, and going the other direction. Now, somebody asked if I like books like Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird. And those are pretty good books. Yeah, I do like Mark Twain, who wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I think Mark Twain's a very clever, smart writer. So he has a lot of clever books. I haven't read that one in a while. And To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't remember super well. I wouldn't, put those in my top 5 books or whatever, but they're good. Those are good literature. Now, people also mentioned The Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien. And yeah, he's cool too. I haven't read all those. When I was a kid, I read The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. I didn't read all the way through the series. I saw the movies, but I'm not as into movies as books, so maybe someday I'll read the rest of The Lord of the Rings. Pretty cool world. I like fantasy and stuff like that, but it got kind of dense in that first one, so never ended up finishing it. Now, am I motivated by time? Yes. Somebody asked, am I familiar with any other piecewise Collatz type problems? I'm not sure what you mean. If you mean similar processes like 5x plus 1 instead of 3x plus 1, or if you mean different unsolved problems with a similar mood. In this episode, we're mostly going into the main 3x plus 1 interpreted in different bases. So we're not going into as many variations on it being 3x plus 1. But we're going into how that is arbitrary, yet will show us a lot about the techniques it takes to prove things. Now, as far as if you mean, am I familiar with other unsolved cool problems? Yeah, we got a lot of cool unsolved problems in my notes. We have too many to film right now. That's why I keep saying I need a team, because when I'm editing all my stuff, it took me like a week and a half to get the last episode out, the main episode from the one before. And I want them coming out like every 6 days or something. I want more bonus content on this channel that's not live streams and stuff too. We're getting there. But for now, we do what we can do. But there's a lot of unsolved problems that I want to make episodes about that I can only edit so much at a time right now. And for the grades, just to follow up a little bit more, I see the main combo class channel somewhat like a TV show. So the grades are not only markers for eras in my life and for the other things I said, but also can be seen as seasons of a TV show. And on this channel, you get all of the bonus content of the show. That other channel, you get our main episodes. But it's sort of like seasons of a TV show at its best. That's what we will progress toward. Now, a lot of fun comments, and some people said they're in school and got boring books to read. It's true, when you're in school and you're forced to read a book, it's hit or miss. You're not going to like every book they send your way, but you got to try and get your best out of them. I'll note that as I tell a story in a minute of me taking this blueprint, this relates to my old school. This is the blueprint of a building in my old school. And as I tell tales of me being a hooligan in high school, remember that within that, I still got mostly A's and a few B's mixed in. I got good grades, and I got really good grades before that. I got a little soured to the experience of getting straight A's because they had me training for this valedictorian program, and then I got a B+, so they removed me from it, and it like totally messed with my schedule. But then in high school, when I was slacking a little more, remember that I still tried my best to, when given a book in class, get your best out of it. Find something you can enjoy out of it. And maybe what you understand out of it is even things you dislike. You can figure out what is something in writing that I know to avoid. What is a plot I'm uninterested in, or a writing technique I consider to be cheesy, or things like that. So try and get something from the books. Even though I can relate that not all the ones thrown your way in school will be interesting. I remember in 9th grade, I had to read the whole first book of Twilight. I don't know why my teacher picked that. It's like sort of considered like a cheesy meme book. And it's not that great. It's all right. Not that great. Pretty thick book. And I remember being like, why are we reading Twilight in school? Why am I reading this massive book about like some like teenage werewolf drama? Now, somebody asked why I have a blueprint from my old school. Well, that's one of the stories coming up in our stream in a moment. Now, we mentioned unsolved mysteries, solvable games, and rare blueprints in the title, and we talked a little bit about a few unsolved mysteries. I think it might be time to talk about the rare blueprints. I gotta run inside real quick, and I'll be back in a moment, and I will tell you the story of this rare blueprint. All right, folks, we're back. Just had to run to the bathroom real quick, but it's about time to move on to our next one. To some comment by Stick here. I greatly love Kurt Vonnegut from that comment, one of my favorites. Philip K. Dick is great as well. And yes, Hermann Hesse, if I'm pronouncing that right, I have read a little bit from, not quite as much. But those are some cool things. Philip K. Dick also writes some fun, absurdist things. Maybe we'll do one or two of my favorites from him as our next book club. Like our last one introduced a lot of random books in my room. That was just the tip of the iceberg. So we'll show some more fiction next time, including some authors like that. I will note, I mentioned Kurt Vonnegut last time as one of my favorite authors. If anyone needs a cool fiction thing to read, consider reading one like Cat's Cradle or Slaughterhouse-Five or Sirens of Titan from Kurt Vonnegut. Now, somebody said it's a little worrying, or there's two comments about worrying-ish things. One is saying that fire could set fire to all my stuff. Don't worry, we are safe behind the camera. We make it look like chaos for a few reasons, one of which being that I think it's symbolic to associate fire and destruction with growth and learning because they're secretly in conjunction philosophically. The other being that it grabs attention. In the last episode, if anyone doesn't watch the last episode linked in the description, at least watch the first clip of the giant fire. It grabs attention. The last one, I'm not sure if YouTube sent it to that many people, but for those who do see the beginning, they're like, oh, whoa, I get to watch a big fire while I'm learning about math. There is a hose and other safety precautions. Now, everyone's really worried about, like, if it touches the desk is going to blow up in fire. I don't think you've worked with much fire. It takes a lot to light a thick log. When you're camping and you're trying to light a campfire, you have to really work for like 10 minutes to get a big log lit, very carefully, aiming your fire, building it around it. It takes a lot to light something like a corner of a desk. So it's safer than it looks. Don't worry about the fire. I have never gotten an injury from fire. I have gotten cuts around here. I could be safer around the broken glass. I clean it up after it falls, but while it's falling and such, I've gotten cuts and stuff. But I haven't gotten a single burn. So don't worry about my fires, but do not copy them. Remember that some of the things I do are so that you can see a human doing one of those things once without having to do it yourself. The value of the internet. You get to watch, things that you're not going to do yourself. And we do have safety stuff. There's a great hose right there and other things as well. Now, somebody also was wondering a worry about, it's a little worrying, they said, that I have a blueprint of my old school. Now, don't worry, I didn't get this after I graduated. That would be kind of creepy if I had, after I graduated, for some reason gotten a blueprint of my school. But I was going through old things, and I've been cleaning out a lot of things because at some point I want to move out of my parents' house. I've been living here a lot longer than expected the past few years because I had all these injuries and surgeries to recover from and stuff. But I want to move out, and I can't necessarily afford to live in this neighborhood. It's very expensive in the Bay Area. So there might be a grade or two. Don't worry, I will visit here all the time. My family lives here, and the cats live here. I'm not going to leave Dandelion for very long, don't worry. But I might have to bring the clocks out to the woods and rent a place out in the woods at some point, because it would just be nice to get out from my parents' backyard for a minute. And we might bring the clocks out into the woods and rent a place in the woods for grade -3. We're going to see. So I've been sorting through some of my stuff because I got this small room inside with a lot of boxes of stuff. And one of the boxes I found had two rare things in it. One of it, which was sort of why I started digging through this box when I noticed it had it, was I had been talking about, I used to be really into these things called magic cards, which is actually before I took the blueprint, the era that I was into magic cards. And not only was the era when I played these old cards that are now weirdly, now everyone's going to think they're expensive in value. They're not expensive in value. Maybe we'll come across one that's worth like $10 or something. In that case, we can sell one, but they're not going to be worth that much money. I've looked, it's not like the oldest sets, but it's like the almost oldest sets. They've been making this game called Magic that I found the cards I had for it. I didn't find all of them necessarily, but I found a large box of them. And the era where I played was already pretty old because I'm 30, and this was when I was like 10. So it was like 20 years ago. They've been doing it for like 30 years, so near the beginning. But additionally, I got maybe the greatest gift in terms of the mood it gave me. One of the greatest gifts I've ever gotten in my life, certainly, was on my like 8th or 9th birthday. I had some friends over in a different backyard. It wasn't this house. My family didn't live here yet. We lived in a renovated basement. It was this little basement-y thing with a few rooms attached and this tiny little yard, tiny place somewhere else in town. And it was small enough that when my brother was born, he's way younger than me, we're not going to be able to fit there, and we had to move. We were like crammed in. But in the old tiny place that I consider like the elves' cottage, because you had to go through this weird little back gate and it had a cool garden and it was like this little renovated basement cottage, I had some friends over for like my 8th or 9th birthday, and one of my parents' friends came over, Nat, and if Nat randomly is watching this, I think he watches my main videos, I don't think he's going to be watching this, but if he randomly is watching this one, thank you. I do want to chat with Nat again sometime because he knows cool things he teaches logic and mathematical things. So he also helped get me into some early paradoxes. He also, when he knew I was into mathematical things, showed me a lot of cool, like Martin Gardner type paradoxes and stuff. Now, he gave me a box of his old Magic cards because he was trying to quit playing because some people find them addictive, and I don't know, I found them, I played them in middle school, and then when I got to the age where I was old enough to, have continued, I was like more worried about like parties and girls and playing music and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, I don't need to play the Magic cards anymore. Those are like a geekier side of my identity than what I was currently being. But now I'm very interested in the math because there's a lot of cool math about those, I want to say. In any case, my family friend Nat gave me this box of old Magic cards. He was trying to quit because they can be like addictive for some people. They're little pieces of cardboard that it's very like lottery-like when you buy certain packs of like, which do you get the best one or which combo of good ones do you get? And the most fun part that I would do was called drafts. And that was where you would... Okay, I'm getting kind of sidetracked. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about the weird blueprint from my school that I had. So the point was that this was a phase of my life where I played things like Magic cards way back in the day in a box. And associated with, stuffed in that box from a slightly later era of my life, was another very important prop, this blueprint. And I recently unsurfaced both of those. And I'll save the Magic cards for the end and see what time we have for that. I mentioned that we would talk about this in response to the comment. So here's the story of why I have this weird old blueprint of what's called the A building of the high school I went to. Now, a very mysterious building that it's doing. There's two weird buildings in this story. So the high school had a lot of weird buildings. It was a big high school. Thousands of people in it. And literally. And there was one weird building is the one this is the map of, called the A building. And that one was weird because it had all these lower layers that were used for theater things. There was like theater stages and different things. And the one class I had, there was a drama class with this total slacker teacher, and it was my senior year. So I would wander around the A building and see weird places in there, old like abandoned hallways and bathrooms and rooms and weird places that were fully old and defunct or turning into new things, and it was sort of like a maze. And you could go deeper in the maze if you knew how, because there was things that were like under the stage and under the stage, and these weird rooms related to the theater stuff that I never fully got to investigate because I wasn't like a theater kid really, although I had some friends who were. But I was there in a drama class once. Separately, there's another building, which is called the Old Gym in this story. Now, people wouldn't know what it is these days because it was destroyed the year after this story. They literally destroyed it the year after I graduated, and this was my senior year. So, in my senior year, I was taking this class called Heart Fitness. I like exercise. This isn't going to be against exercise because I think exercise is cool. I like nature and I like taking hikes and even just straight up exercise. I've got to get back into push-ups and crunches and stuff like that. During good parts of my life, I do exercises. They're good. But for school, it was annoying to have to take a gym credit. And so in my first year, in the freshman year, I took this easy class that's like the slacker version of what it could possibly be for gym, called Heart Fitness. We're going to keep your heart fit. It was just like the simplest little exercises and a lot of freedom in this weird place called the Old Gym, and then you'd sometimes go to the track behind it. But in the Old Gym, the teacher would let you do pretty much whatever. If you're like, I gotta walk off and run an errand, they would let you do that back in the day at the high school. And so during my freshman year, I was a good boy and I paid attention to all the rules, and I was just in the slacker class, but I got my A and did a good job. In the senior year, I think I still got an A because I was on good terms with the teacher and I showed up every day, showed up most days, but I would bend the rules a little more and even just play by the rules of the teacher who didn't care that much. And I was allowed to wander around this place called the Old Gym sometimes. Sometimes there would be a free time where you're supposed to exercise. Here's the weights. Here's the pads and stuff. And it'd be like, okay, can I walk off? I gotta use the bathroom or whatever thing, and then go off for a while. And I would wander around the Old Gym. And they had all these weird things in this building that they had decided they were going to destroy because the building was sort of crumbling. It was this old building, crumbling, breaking and stuff. And they didn't have enough resources, teachers are underpaid and stuff. They didn't have enough faculty to take care of all the stuff. So there was weird extra desks and extra chairs sitting in random rooms, weird this and that. And something you'd come across once in a while was a filing cabinet, one of those metal things with a few drawers in it. And those are very symbolic to me. This, somewhat durable metal container. Who knows what's in it, but it's probably some sort of paper-written file. Very interesting and mysterious and fable-like. And filing cabinets certainly show up in the fiction I write. And there would be filing cabinets once in a while, usually empty. And one day when I was wandering around the Old Gym, I opened a filing cabinet in there. And during my Heart Fitness class, technically during the hours of the Heart Fitness class, I was wandering around with this other kid in the different rooms of the gym. And I was still logged in for attendance and stuff. It was another era. Do not follow my lead. Now, and if you do, remember that I still got A's. So if you don't get A's, you're following my lead wrong. Now, in one of those things, in a filing cabinet, there was this blueprint. And I was like, what is this blueprint? This looks like an OG, old school, original. It's like the blue of the blueprint. Normally you hear the word blueprint and it's slang for what the drawings on this are. They're not always blue, actually. There's actually a blueprint. And it looks like some sort of planning thing for a building. And when I looked at it, I was like, it's for the A building. It's for, apart from the Old Gym, the other next most mysterious building in the school. So I took that and kept it. Sorry, school. I don't think they needed it. They were going to destroy the building anyway. And I still don't know exactly how to read it, but it shows some level of the A building. It's a whole blueprint to it. Absolutely crazy. So I'm going to need to maybe scan. It's really hard to like show up to the camera because it's really fragile feeling. And I want to like bend it very carefully and not like be holding it to the camera in a way that destroys it. So we might have to like photocopy. Maybe we'll like some glossy thing on this sometime. But I gotta photocopy it or something. Get some images of this to see what does it look like in a strange building and what mysteries are they hiding. They seem like they were hiding something weird in that A building. What weird thing were they hiding right there? And how old is it? Probably really old, because this is what I consider doubly old. It's a doubly old clue when you're telling it to somebody later about how you found it long enough ago that the time you found it would be considered old, and when you found it, it already looked old. So this is a doubly old clue because this thing already looked old when I found it 15 years ago. No, 12 years, 13 to 14 years ago. Now, and to people who are mentioning Carlo with the hose and stuff earlier about our fire comments, I want to remind everybody, I guess you haven't seen this yet. You can ask Carlo when he comes on for an interview. Well, I'll let him be as honest as possible. That's the goal with any guest. That Carlo is just as encouraging of the fire and the broken clocks as I am. Same with my other camera people. The camera people I hire, if we're ever doing crazy stuff, I'm not endangering them. Don't worry about that. It's their idea half the time. So, someone said the bird chirp is classic. And yeah, do you hear that one bird up there that just do that chit, chit? There's this one bird, I don't know if it's the same one, that like copies car alarms, copies thises, copies thatses, and does a lot of good noises. Now my birdologist, or probably called an ornithologist, friend is going to come by on a live stream sometime. He came by the other day, but it was a really noisy day in the neighborhood, and there weren't that many birds hanging around because there was all this like, you know, people running their lawnmower and car alarms and all this stuff in the neighborhood. And so on some day when my friend who studies that is around and when there's more bird sounds, I'm going to feature some people on live streams. Leave a comment if you have any questions for an ornithologist friend of mine who knows about birds, any questions you'd like to ask when that live stream comes up, any questions you'd like to ask other guests, such as we're going to do a music related couple streams with my best friend came back into town. I feel guilty calling him my best friend because I have a lot of great friends who I love all of them. But the one I would have to call, like, the one I've been through so much stuff with, and if I had to pick one, my best friend, moved back into town. And I actually have to go to a housewarming thing after this. So I shouldn't make this stream last much longer than an hour, because I do have to go to a housewarming thing related to my best friend coming back into town. And that's pretty cool. There's also other friends who I'll feature, or even my family. Leave a comment if you have any questions you would like to ask my parents or my younger brother. Now, somebody asked a comment about on LSD how someone would function on math. Sounds like a grade -3 comment to me. Now, moving forward, before I got this map, which we'll get a deeper look sometime when we have the right setup, where I'm not as worried about damaging this super fragile thing. Before that era, I had been really into these things called magic cards, which I'm going to finish the story of because they are going to get some mathematical episodes. They're actually related to the solvable games part of the title. And first of all, the story is I got this big box of old Magic cards from my family friend, and I was already into them, but I got even more into them. And then I started doing these things called drafts, which are actually the fun way to do it if you're going to spend money on the cards, because it's like going to a movie or something. You spend the money to be in a social event where you open the packs as a group and do this group game where you're like battling each other, and then you keep the ones that you ended up drafting. But you also, in the process, have this whole group activity that you are part of. And those were fun and actually cool, but I don't recommend people buying any of those new sets that the Magic designers, shout out. The Magic artists, shout out. The people who write the books behind it, mostly shout out. I think there was something weird about one of the newer ones, but the old ones were great. And I haven't read all the newer ones. I read a weird article about something, but don't shout out Wizards of the Coast, who prints the plastic. You always got the big distributor in the mix ruining things. I'll try and make sure we don't get that in any combo class stuff. I've turned down all the sponsorships so far. I've made less money on purpose to not have me saying an ad, so that if I'm talking about a product, it's not an ad. And so I'll try and make sure that doesn't happen for combo class, but many big operations have some big corporation involved. Like, how movies got directors and producers? Well, the producer does secure certain important things and do a lot of important groundwork, but sometimes the producer is more on the end of the one with the money who makes certain decisions, and the director is the one who's like the one with the ideas who makes certain decisions. And it's sort of weird to give a equal share, or sometimes even more of a share, to the one with the money than the one with the ideas. So the one with the money in this case, or who produces all the pieces of cardboard and plastic, Wizards of the Coast, sucks. Now they're trying to print 1 billion sets to try and make a bunch of money. But the Magic designers make sure it's a consistent game where they shouldn't need to ban many cards from a tournament. They should be able to make rules like you can use any card from this era, or from beyond this era, or before or after this era, or from the past 5 years, or certain types of ways that tournaments filter in and out, and not have to ban many cards, and have all the rest, thousands of them, fit together in a cohesive game where you can't design a single deck that always wins. And I've wondered, how can we concretify some mathematical questions about that? First, let's note that some of these cards that I got from the family friend are really old. So some of these are from some of the first sets. This is called Legends. This one was another one of the really early sets. It's called The Dark or something. This one called Alliances is really old. This is closer to when I started playing, is this one called Odyssey. But some of these are really old. And they're not, what I want to point out is they're not old enough that these are worth a ton of money. So don't worry about that thing. Also, yeah, they're kind of bent. They've been through a lot over the years. But we're using them as props to demonstrate mathematical things now, so don't worry if they're a little bent. I'm probably not ever going to put one of these in a tournament or anything. Somebody said, what was the article I read about the Magic the Gathering book? Can I recall? All right, people hate when I get political, but I'll say real quick. Yeah, so I used to really like the Magic the Gathering books, and I still theoretically do. I just haven't read them in a while. I own tons of the old ones. I have the books of the Odyssey block, of the Mirrodin block. I love the books behind them. There's so let's see. Where's one that's in the plot? There's one we just passed that was called Glasses of Urza. Where'd that one go? And this is called Glasses of Urza. Urza is a character in it. And so some of them are just creatures that exist in the plot, but some of them are characters and such. And it's a little political, but the article I read about one of the newer books that I hadn't read, I love the old books, I don't know about the new ones, was that they had some characters who were in a gay or lesbian relationship or something along those lines, which is a totally acceptable thing for humans to be in. And that then, because foreign markets weren't that happy about that, they made the writer chose to, I don't know who made who, like, switch it out and be like, no, that girl character never liked other girls. She only likes guys. That's silly to think she liked girls. And so they kind of like redacted this plot about a gay character and made them straight to please foreign markets. And I think that's dumb. I think that being gay is totally fine. So that was the weird thing I read in an article about a new Magic the Gathering book. I don't support, redacting normal human behavior to fit a foreign market. But that's not a big necessary strike. I don't know. I just read one thing once. The old books, maybe the new ones too, were awesome. Those were really cool fantasy worlds. Now, these cards from all the old sets show this lineage of mechanics. And the interesting thing is that even if you allow any card that's ever been printed, it's sort of hard to break the game if you still follow the 4-card limit. There's almost all, they didn't have it right at the beginning of the game, but there's almost always a rule that in the deck you assemble, there's a minimum deck size. In the typical modern rules for the main type, it is 60 cards for your deck. And there's another type that is 100 cards. There used to be a type with 40 cards, but usually 60 cards is your deck, but you can only have up to 4 of each. And so one of the ways I found now when I was thinking back at them to sort of concretify the math behind what's going on in the game theory is if you allow any card ever, not counting a few joke cards and stuff they've printed in some joke sets, but any card that was ever once like a standard card at some point, up to 4 of them. And you follow what if you're not going to be able to follow the 60 card deck thing for this? What is a deck you could design that if the opponent doesn't have any special ways of hyper interacting while it's your turn and doing a counter spell special thing to cancel out your things, which could happen in a real game, assuming your opponent doesn't have any magical tricks up their sleeve, what is a deck that would always win? You can't do it with 60 cards with the 4-card limit. They've designed it well enough that it's impossible to do that. But what's the biggest amount of cards you could make in a deck that would always win on the first... No, I forgot some important words. I'm saying we're going against a player who doesn't have any special tricks up their sleeve. What I mean is that if you go first, they don't have any tricks that before they've even had a turn, they can do anything. I'm saying decks that always win on the first turn, which is possible. You can make a combo to go off on the first turn with the right side of cards. There are times a tournament has been broken by a card that makes a deck too likely to win on the first few turns. But what about always winning on the first turn? Now, a lot of people use that term always wrong in this case. There are people, as usual, there are people who are wrong on both sides of the aisle, and the answer is somewhere in the middle. And both sides of the aisle are, some people say, I've seen, when you try and look up this topic, a deck that always wins, some will say, here's a great deck, this one always wins. But I can imagine an opening hand it could draw that wouldn't win. So when we say a deck always wins, we have to look at the worst case scenario. We have to say, is there any ordering you could shuffle the deck into and draw your opening hand and have the rest of the deck in that wouldn't? If there's any possible way you can find where it wouldn't win based on what you drew on the first turn right away, then it's not an always win deck. Then you get other people who say, well, yeah, then of course it's impossible. But with the right amount of cards, if they publish too many of different things in the future, they might make it possible up to varying sizes of deck. Because in my own experiments, I've gotten to about 20 cards in a deck that always wins. And for those who don't know how it works, you draw 7 at the beginning. Some cards might have an ability to let you draw more,
but you draw 7 of the 20. And regardless of what 7 of the 20-ish cards and what order the rest are in, I have created piles that always win on the first turn. And before I make an episode about that, I'm trying to see how big I can get it. I've one that's about 21 or 22 cards in a deck that I'm still figuring out the exact maximum I can construct. And I feel like somebody who's played Magic in the past 15 years would have a head start on me. So if anybody knows this really well, I want you to take on this challenge, which is, what are combinations of cards using up to 4 of each that you know will always win? And you are allowed to use your Black Lotuses and anything like that. You're not allowed to use what is called an unset card, which are these joke sets. And you have to always win. You have to look for the worst case scenario. There has to be no worst case scenario where you wouldn't win on the first turn. Of course, we have to make other specifications, like let's assume that if you give yourself an extra turn, that it's okay if you win before the other player gets a turn. We have to assume you go first. We have to assume they don't have any weird counterspell tricks up their sleeve. We maybe want to assume that you don't want to play anything that like makes them reveal something from their deck and depends on that. You have to imagine their deck could contain anything that's not some trick up their sleeve counterspell. So you can't rely on whatever it would be. Nothing with a coin flip is going to work unless it would be, oh, you'd still win if the coin goes the wrong way, because you have to look at the worst case scenario. So it's pretty wild. I will say to anybody who happens to play Magic who stumbles by this, some cards that I'm considering in my piles of an auto win deck. Well, here's the main challenge I'll present to people, is that there are mostly 2 types of card in Magic. Ones that create what's called mana, which are typically lands do that, or sometimes other cards that generate this resource that other cards are required to use to come into existence even. So often your cards are ones that make the mana and ones that use it and do important things. And I'm trying to find more crossover cards that do both, because otherwise you hit this inherent problem when you get to about 12 cards. If I have more than 6 lands or mana resources, including this really good one called Black Lotus, that's the OG overexpensive card, the most expensive card ever. It's ridiculous how expensive that thing is, but it's actually a really good card. It is one of the best cards in the game. It was overpowered. They don't allow it in most tournaments. Even the ones that allow it only allow 1 copy usually. But in our game, in our challenge, we're saying the typical rules up to 4 of each card, but we're allowing any card. But you have to win on the first turn every time. Now, with Black Lotuses and such, or lands, these are things that create the mana resource. If you have more than 6 of those, you could draw a hand of just 7 of those, and you're stuck, unless some of them have some way to draw a card somehow also. But what if you get the ones that require the mana to come into existence? The creatures and other types of spell and such. Well, if you draw 7 of those, you're stuck too. And since most cards are in one of those 2 camps, it's hard to do more than 6 of the mana generators or more than 6 of the mana eaters without there being a circumstance where your opening hand of 7 has you stuck. I've gotten a little past that because that's 12 cards you'd get stuck at. Even that's really hard because let's say it takes 3 cards for your combo to work to win the game of your ones that cost stuff but do stuff. Well, then you need even fewer of the mana generators, because if you had 5 of them, you could get 2 of the combo pieces and not have the 3rd, and not have any of your card drawing resources or any other things. It is getting dark, someone commented. Let me grab a candle or 2 real quick. I'm not going to do the stream too long because I want to go to a housewarming party, but it's going to be going pretty late. So I'm not in that much of a rush. I'll grab a candle or 2 real quick because the darkness hits all of a sudden right here. It'll be easier to set up the candles and stuff before it's dark. Let me run and get that. We are going to continue talking about Magic, but it's going to be along the lines of math. It's going to be what solvable questions can we ask about combinations of cards that lead you to winning on the first turn. And maybe we can keep going further. And as they add more cards, or as we get more help, expand this to a deck that's closer and closer to 60 cards. Now, there's a funny loophole, I'll say real quick. There's these old cards you used to play for ante. And so they say, if you're not playing for ante, remove it from your deck beforehand. It normally means, I think, don't use it as part of your deck. But if we sort of, interpret it in the way that we're part of the deck, then we remove them. What if we said we're allowed to count the ante cards as part of the 60 and we're not playing for ante, so we remove them? Kind of a loophole, but the amount of ante cards they've ever printed is 9 that say that. That is 9 times 4 would remove 36 cards from the deck. That would leave 24 cards. So with my weird sort of loophole, I'm putting the ante cards in the deck and then I'm removing them because my opponent doesn't want to play for ante as part of it. Then that leaves 24 actual cards we need in the deck to win. And I'm close to that because my best one I've come up with so far that needs further testing, and I'm not sure if it works, has 21 or 22. So we're getting close to the amount where, with a weird sort of joke of a loophole, we can have a 60 card deck that always wins. So that's pretty wild. I don't know. I tried to look this up online, and some people put smart thoughts, and it keeps getting derailed and not thought about by people who either say it's impossible to have a deck that always wins without thinking of how big of a deck could you do that does it, because there are sizes that can, versus people who say, oh, it's easy. You just do 20 Black Lotus, 20 Channel, 20 Fireball. Well, that's an example of a deck that, if you were allowed to use more than 4 of each card, so that doesn't count, would win like 95% of the time and would win the first turn like 90% of the time. But that's not enough. We're going for 100%ers, baby. So let me grab some candles. Right now it is 8:42 p.m. to those who are chatting about what time it is. It is going to hit dark real quick, so I am going to want to set those up before that. Now, think of any questions you have. We are going to talk a little more about Magic the Gathering lore and math. So I'm going to put this fragile thing back inside too when I grab the candles. We'll look more at the blueprint later. Say bye to it now, ladies and gentlemen. But we will leave a comment if you want to think about that. If anyone leaves early, make sure that when you leave, if you haven't yet seen my main combo class episode, that you click the link in the description. If you haven't seen it yet, when you leave the stream. So I'll be back in a minute, folks. Love you all.
Alright, folks, so I got a few candles. And this glowy thing. Remember these glowy things that charge up in the daytime? Collect their soul. Well, it's kind of dim right now for some reason. Collect their. Maybe it's because. Is it too. What? Wait, this one's not that happy. What happened with there? What? What the? Okay. Maybe we. I don't know what happened with this thing. It was glowing a second ago. Now, we got 3 candles. And. This one's going to be hard to light. How am I going to light this thing? It's like the thickest walls ever. There's not even enough of a candle in there. Got 2 candles. And I'll try not to light all of the other stuff on fire. I put the very lightable blueprint back inside. The blueprint would... You know how I say, like, don't worry about having a fire next to a desk? A desk takes a minute to go up in flame, and I'm experienced. Blueprint does not take a minute. A blueprint will go up in flame in a second. So, do not, I moved that one back inside. Magic cards, you want to see how quick they go up in flame? No, I'm kidding. But watch me accidentally burn, like, the one that's worth $50 out of all of them. But, I have a huge box of those magic cards inside, and I'm going to bring the huge box out for another stream. I'll make a stream just called, I found my old magic cards, because I'm still looking for some more of them. There's like some more in some closet somewhere. I'll make a stream soon when I find them all called, I found my old magic cards, and we'll go through them and we'll look at the weird rarity. I do know that there's a few in the old list that I found, that I looked at, that these ones are on what's called the reserved list. They're not expensive. None of these cards are worth more than $10. I don't even think any of them are worth more than $5. But these ones up here, most of these, I'm not sure about the war elephant there. I think I had that for a different reason. Maybe are on what's called the reserved list. And that means that they're never going to print not only that card again, so there's like only some amount of thousands of them in existence, but also that they won't print a functional reprint. They define a functional reprint. They could put a different name. They are not allowed to make a card with the same power, toughness, mana cost, and abilities. So for example, here is one that's a artifact is the name for something that costs a colorless amount of mana, which it doesn't have to be the new thing called colorless. It's a, what's the term? A general, whatever, and a vague, whatever type of mana you want to pay for it. 2 of the general type. I called it colorless, but now they have a new thing that like cares if it was made in a colorless way. So 2 of the general type of mana, and it's an artifact, and that's like this item that you put on the battlefield that, for example, this is one of the ones that costs mana to play. 2 is its cost, and it does. No, this one's not a good artifact. This is a really bad card. You pay 1, and when it's in play, whenever you want, you can pay 1 more mana, tap it. This is the old symbol. They have a new symbol for that now. Sacrifice it to gain 2 life or prevent 2 damage to a player or creature. That is a really bad card. This is like one of the worst cards ever. But this thing is never allowed to be printed as a functional reprint. They can't make any other name and picture as long as they can't make an artifact that costs 2 that has an ability that's 1 tap, sacrifice me to gain 2 life or prevent 2 damage to a creature or player. So they have these things called functional reprints on here. Now, for anyone who's played this, who knows how they have all these new abilities, they got their death touch and all this. That's not that new, but they got all these new, proliferate and all the new abilities or whatever. Y'all ever heard of banding? This one doesn't even call it banding. They call it bands. This is the most confusing ability. This is the biggest mistake in their history ever. They called it so it's
This one says bands. There's a difference between one called banding and one called bands with other, and it's the most confusing ability of all time. The ability itself wouldn't be that confusing, but they like made it so confusing by giving it like 5 names and making this thing called bands with other be a different thing, and it is crazy. So somebody said the lights make lines when you have glasses on. I think they're just making lines. I think the camera is doing that. I think the camera is doing what your glasses would do. So, yeah, you're commenting that to reply. Yeah, that your glasses do the same thing as this. It's true. Sometimes I get this. Eyes can get this. It's a condition eyes can have and glasses can do. And I think I have it to a degree where, do car lights ever look like this to you folks? Car lights look a little like this to me. Like, not quite as high, but to a degree, car lights look like that to me. Now, yeah, bands with others, different though. Here's the crazy thing. Bands with other is a different one than banding. Why does this one... I already hear all this discussion online about how it's dumb that banding and bands with other are different things. Why does this one just say bands? It's neither. It's a third category. It's supposed to be banding, not bands with others, but they call some of them bands that do banding, and then they have bands with other, and then they change the ruling. There's one card. You want to see one of the worst creatures of all time? Now, maybe I do need to somehow pull open the visuals here. We'll do that next time, the visuals. But there's a creature that removes the bands with other ability from stuff, and that there's like almost no cards printed in existence with that. A video I want to do sometime is the worst cards ever, because it's kind of funny. I was trying to look at like what makes the worst card ever, and it almost can't be this type called a creature that like has some inherent ability that sits on the field to do something or another, no matter how bad the creature's abilities are. Being a creature does something. So I have the worst creature in my mind. It's one called Wood Elemental. We'll look at that later. But the worst card couldn't really be a creature because those inherently do something by like being there to block stuff. There's cards that almost do bad things, but those could be worked into a combo in a weird way. You could do like tricky, strange things with the bad sounding ones. There's a card that says discard your hand. It's inherently a bad card unless you work it into some weird combo strategy, in which case it could help you, because discarding your whole hand is like a big effect that could help some weird combo. So the worst cards might not be the ones that hurt you. They might be the ones that do nothing, because those are the ones that waste a card in your hand. In fact, there's a huge difference between a card that does nothing and a card that does nothing but draws you another card. The card that does nothing but draws you another card doesn't take up a spot that you had to draw. You only get to draw one new one per turn, unless you got special abilities going or special spells. You normally draw one new one per turn. So you don't want a card that does nothing. If you draw it, it's like half of your turn is wasted, your new potential that you drew. And if you draw a card that can then draw another, if they had something that costs 0 mana that just said draw a card, and they made a bunch of different cards that were similar to that, then it would be very easy to make a 60-card deck with my idea that always wins on the first turn. Because most of your deck could be non-existent. There could be these cards that flip by and filter through. Ones that cost 0 and draw you a card. In fact, there are 2 cards that flew too close to the sun that I use in my deck idea. They one time made a card that you can pay 2 life instead of its cost. You start with 20 life, and those get chipped away. They made a card that instead of having to pay the mana resource that comes from the lands and stuff, you could pay 2 life, and it contains draw a card on it. And that card, called Gitaxian Probe, it has 4 spots on any list of... If your combo does not require you to lose life in the process, and you get to use all up to 19 of your 20 in the process of winning on the first turn. Like, who cares if I get down to 1 life as long as I don't get to 0 before they do? That's basically how you usually kill them, is by making their life go from 20 to 0, which is kind of hard in 1 turn, but we make it happen. Now, when in my deck that's going to make that happen with a smaller deck size that, is only like just as a mathematical experiment, I have 4 Gitaxian probes in there because there are combos that don't require inherent life loss, so they let you lose 8 life total to take up the spots of 4 blank cards in your deck. Draw the next card. That's good in many combos because you get quicker to a core essence of the deck. Now, there's another one like that. There's one called Street Wraith. And this one called Street Wraith is one that you can also cycle. Is something you can discard it to get a new card. And you can do 2 life for it instead of paying the mana. That is typically the way to do it. So in a way, if I'm okay losing 16 of my 20 life, I get 8 free cards. And those are going to go into these ideas when I'm designing the biggest decks. I'm going to find one that is okay with me losing 16 life to get those 8 free cards, because those will really help in the experiment of trying to win on the first turn. Now, beyond that, the other things, maybe I kind of want to note the ones I included in the deck in case anybody happens to play the game and wants to test this later. No, okay, I'll do that later. We'll do another whole episode. It's getting so dark and I got to go to a housewarming party soon. We'll talk a little more about theory, but we'll do the whole deck idea I have after I double check it a little more, run through 21 or 22 cards, see how well they work, and then maybe get some of you to test it with me of would any 7 card start and ordering of the next ones, because we have draw spells, work. We'll also at some point just do a tutorial of how the game works, kind of interesting, like a more detailed version of when I said some things are called creatures and some things are called lands and such. But in general, for those who are interested, sometime we're going to have to go through these really old cards I got. These are a mix of just such a variety of sets, but some of these are really old sets. This one's called Ice Age. It was probably from the literal Ice Age. That's how old it was. Somebody asked, what if you're on the draw? That's a different challenge. To mathematize it, we have to pick one, and it's not about a deck you'd actually play. If somebody really wants to check math, I will design a 60-card deck that I think has incredible odds, and I would like to know what % of the time it wins. I think I could design a full 60-card deck that, regardless of if we're on the first or second, could win more than half of the time. But I don't know what % of the time it could win. And so that would be great if somebody wanted to test hypergeometric distributions of a full 60-card deck. It's very hard math when I looked into it. I'm not ready to tackle that challenge of a 60-card deck where you don't use 4 of everyone. Some have 1, some have 2, some have 3, some have 4. It's a really complicated math to see all the possible orderings of that because you're on huge magnitudes of numbers. Now, oh, the cat's coming back. What'd the cat do? Oh, God. What did he... Oh, yeah. I hope he didn't get something from the tree. He just came down from the tree. I hope he didn't get something from that. So, if you're on the draw, it's a different challenge. If anyone wants, they can design their own deck. Here's what on the draw we will assume. A different challenge. You draw, so you have 8 cards, but in this case, you assume that they have mana available, and you assume that they have blockers. So you no longer can win via combat. They could have creatures to block, and you can no longer win with anything that assumes they have no mana on the board. So if you go second, you have to win in a much clearer damage way. You cannot use combat or things like that. They could have things they've set up during their turn. But you do get 8 cards. So different challenge. I do think it could be a bigger deck. I think if I allowed myself 8 cards, but not combat and stuff like that, that I think I could deal You can do infinite combos, which are called that, but you're not actually allowed to say the number infinity. You have to pick an arbitrarily large number. And I wish more Magic players knew about math terms, because an arbitrarily large combo would be much more precise. You do an infinite combo is bad. If you have a combo that runs infinitely in a loop that you can't stop, the game's a draw. Not even every player knows that. But usually your infinite combos really mean I could continue a process indefinitely, and you pick a point when it stops. It means up to infinite. Arbitrarily large in math terms. So we'll say that an arbitrarily large combo, often called an infinite combo, which we'll sometimes call too, is when you make a few cards together, work in this weird, almost like equation that's beyond a perpetual motion machine, generating new of something. And if you can run this loop and start where the card started with something generated, oh, we can keep running it. Now, it doesn't always work. You need to write combo. But examples are you could deal infinite, meaning an arbitrarily large amount of damage to an opponent. You could make an infinite, I'm going to say the word infinite, but no, I mean arbitrarily large. Infinite amount of creatures you could create. You could gain infinite life. You could draw infinite cards, but that would kill you. And in fact, here's the thing. Drawing infinite cards kills you, because if you draw through your deck and you have nothing left to draw and you're told to draw a card, you die. So the win condition on some of the decks I've been designing, of like the 20 card always win mathematical formula decks, is making the opponent draw a billion cards or something. Because sometimes I realized you want the cards to double. So if I have a card that just deals damage to them, what if I draw it too early and I'm not ready to assemble my combo? Well, if I have a card that makes somebody draw X amount of cards, yes, they have variables with some extra mana. They have cards like cost X plus 2 blue, and whatever you paid for X plus those 2 blue is how many cards someone draws. So if I pay 5 of any color and 2 blue, someone draws 5 cards. Now, those could be good, because if I put a few of those in my deck, and if I draw one too early, I can use it for me to draw cards to get where I want to go. But if I've already assembled the combo, and I have gotten, say, infinite mana, I can make the opponent draw an arbitrarily large amount of cards, and that will kill them. So I actually realized a draw spell with X in it is a good way to get a doubled up thing here. Something that if we get it too early, if we would need 2 of them for this to work, but could work. If we get it too early, then you draw some cards. You get the second one later, or the first one later. Got your combo assembled, make the opponent draw a billion cards, and that'll kill them. Now, there are other ones. Somebody said there's one called Thassa's Oracle. That was one I was considering. It felt kind of like cheating because it relates to like deck being a certain size. So it felt kind of like cheating when playing with lower deck sizes. But it actually didn't end up helping me, because when I had one of those in my deck anyway, if I drew all my land resource, all my mana stuff, and that, I'm not ready to win with it. And so I like almost need something that when I draw it with all my lands, helps me in its own way. That one kind of helps me, but then it like blows what it's able to do later. With 2 of them in the deck, you might be able to make it work, where like if you draw the first one, you would use its ability just for help, and the second one would be your win condition when you're ready. But there were other ways that worked better that I found. For anyone who is playing the game, who follows, one that I found, I'll just pull open the stupid thing. It's just gonna look all choppy and glitchy while I pull this open. But where's this? I'm going to pull open an actual visual here, even though I need to glitch it into existence. So, let's glitch. Well, okay, I'm going to get the cards ready real quick. And once I get the cards ready, I will then turn it to my screen. There's not that many cards. It'll just take 1 second. And I'm going to show you like the cards that I figured, one example of what you could build a deck out of. That doesn't mean that this is the ideal deck. But this is an example, and I'm not going to say the numbers. You can try and figure out the numbers of these. Somebody asked if AI can do it. Maybe it would give you a shortcut to test. Like maybe it'll tell you, oh, here's a good thing to test. But please remember, everyone, don't trust the answers the AI is saying. It's right like half the time. That is such a bad ratio on math stuff. Please, if an AI says this is the answer to it, don't believe it. Treat it like something that points you in the right direction as like a help of this is something for you to test. But just don't believe it if it says it has something. Do you know how many AIs have had the proof to, you know, the Collatz conjecture so far? They're wrong. They're ridiculous. When we tried the Chat GPT, it is comical when you put it to the lowest level of comprehension, conversationally or mathematically. It fails. I don't know why we would trust it on knowing that one of these works. So for it to tell me like, here's cards that work well together, sure, but we still have to do a lot of math to figure out if the cards work together. I absolutely don't trust if it says, yep, I proved those work together, because these are so bad. Now, what we're going to look at here is a few cards of one example. There's so many combos that could work here. So this is like far from the only combo that could work in a deck like this. This is one example that still doesn't maximize everything. There are other things that could make this faster. So, oh, what's the other name right here? Oh, man. What's the other name of this one? Here we go. So, okay, I almost have the whole deck here. Sorry, I'll have this in 1 second. You're allowed to use up to 4 of any card that's ever been in existence is my game. And you have to win on the first turn if they don't have any weird tricks up their sleeve. And we're assuming it's your first turn and you're starting, because we need one thing to do the math of. And so the trick of this is, a different trick would be designing a deck that's 60 cards like fairly and seeing the percentage that it can win on the first turn. Here, that's hard math. It's easier math to figure out what's the biggest deck size we can get that always wins 100%. Still very hard. So we're still going to need to think about it very deeply to figure out combinations these could be in, because we need to think through with our draw spells that we have the exact right amount of them and stuff. But one example of a type of deck that I assembled that could work well is, okay, is this all? Yeah, something along these lines. These are the crucial cards in the deck. I'll show here. Now, these are some weirder, newer edition looking things, but this is actually a really old card. This is one of the oldest cards in the game, and it's way overpowered. I want to talk about in game design theory sometime this saga of cards this came from. They sometimes do cycles where each color of the 5 main colors does a thing similarly. And they had a cycle in the very first set of, do they have a picture of the first ones? Go back to the old ones. Yeah. No, go back to the really old ones. Where is it? What did it look like? This is what it used to look like. So this is from the oldest one. And draw 3 cards. It says or force opponent to draw 3 cards. Now they would phrase that as target player draws 3 cards. Now, they had a cycle where each color had, in the first set ever, a spell that cost 1 of its color and had something related to 3. It turns out the black one, called Dark Ritual, gives you more mana. The red one deals damage, called Lightning Bolt. And those are iconic and overpowered spells that they now ban from many things, but not on the level this one's banned. And then some of the other ones are lower, like Giant Growth is a green one, gives +3/+3 to a creature. And that's, normal cards, not too overpowered, it's pretty good. And then you have a really bad one. The white one is Healing Salve, and that one is they thought gaining life was better than it was. They thought to pay 1 white to gain 3 life or prevent 3 damage was like not quite as good, but they thought it was almost as good as draw 3 cards. No, that is such a bad card to gain 3 life to waste you think it's just the cost, but you're using a card on it. It's not worth using a card for certain things, like just bumping your life total up and delaying the inevitable less than a turn worth. This thing, drawing 3 cards, that changes the game. So we're allowed 4 of these in our deck. So we're going to use this overpowered card from the first set. Game theory-wise, it's funny that they've had phases, they get overpowered. They've been ramping up how good the creatures are, where where's my old, creatures? The old creatures used to be like, your power and toughness were not as big as what you had to pay for it unless you had some downside. So it might cost 7 mana and it might be like a 6/6. Or it might cost 5 mana and be 6/6 and have some downside. Now they're just pumping out I'm a 5 mana 6/6 with 50 upsides. But the creatures get a little better, but nowadays, they're overpowering some stuff. They apparently also overpowered stuff in this set called Mirrodin, we'll talk about someday, where things became artifacts and everything got too good at working with artifacts. And they also overpowered things way at the beginning. There were some cards they messed up, one of which is Ancestral Recall, one of which is called Black Lotus. This is, again, another newer print of it, the actual original Black Lotus here. What it's supposed to say is you tap it. It doesn't even say tap. Mono artifact used to mean that. It is used to be tapped. So you tap it and you add 3 mana of any color. And they thought you put out a land. A land adds 1 mana each turn of its color, but it lasts forever. So something that you sacrifice that you only use once to add 3 mana, that can't be that good, right? But when you make something cost 0, you're playing with very dangerous games. And when you make something cost 0 and give you enough to play a significant amount of cards, this thing blows up games. And just this is why on our first turn, if we didn't have Black Lotuses, our deck size would be way smaller with this challenge. But we're only allowed 4 of them. So we do need to add this one called Lotus Petal, maybe. There are other options called Moxes and other cool things we might add for whatever extra mana we need, Lotus Petal or whatever. Now, normally that might be all for our lands, but I realize they have these flippable ones. Most of the flippable ones come into play tapped, and that means they can't activate the first turn. So they're not going to help us in our first turn win, but I found one. There's a thing called Steegate Restoration. If we pay 3 life, now this is cutting it awful close, because I said we're using 8 free cards that cost 2 life each. That would be killing us 16 life. If we pay 3 life on one of these, or we are down to 1 life. But theoretically in this challenge, being at 1 life and then killing the opponent from 20 works. So we can either pay 3 life to have this enter as an untapped, available to add the blue type of mana, the island mana. Or these double spells can do 2 things. Who knew? Normally they come into play tapped. This one needs 3 life, is why it works in this case. We can play the spell instead. We get a choice of these 2. It's like a double card. So we get a choice of these 2 with this card. Now, this one costs a ton of mana. It costs 4 of any type plus 3 of the blue ones. 7 in total. So, but draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. That won't matter because maximum hand size only gets killed at the end of turns and beginning of turns or whatever. We're not going to even let them get to the end of a turn. So this matters. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1. Drawing cards is such an important resource, and even more important in our first turn win challenge. Pretty much the challenge is not only doing our starting balance, but now that I've figured out how hard it is to have more than 6 mana things or more than 6 non-mana things, the challenge is having things that like simultaneously make resources and could draw cards, or are part of a combo and do this, or part of a combo and do that. Another one that works pretty well in terms of being in a combo with something we're already using is this thing called Auriok Salvagers. This is a random card that it's a creature this time. 2 is its power. 4 is its toughness. Those are what happens when it goes in battle and stuff. Now, it costs 3 of some type plus a white one. Plains type mana. Oh, you want to see the evolution? I wonder if I got some plains in here. So yeah, I think I brought some lands on purpose to show this. Yeah, so look at this. This is okay, perfect. I have the evolution of plains. Watch this. This is what plains used to look like. Not at the very beginning, because I don't have the oldest ever cards. But plains used to look like a symbol that's the old tap symbol. Now it's an arrow. Add that to your mana pool. It like tells you the ability. This is the type of card I inherited. Now, the type of card that I played with when I was drafting is more like this. And this is a little before when I was drafting, but I got this in a pack somewhere. They just put the symbol. They're like, you know what a basic land is. There's 5 basic lands. They're the most important type of card in the game. Other things copy them, but everyone knows what they are. Then you get to when they messed up in Mirrodin. They make a lot of variations of this flip land might have been a mistake that I showed you a minute ago that they put in the game. Maybe they're going to regret that one. There's some weird noise there. I'm going to see what that is in a second. But then in Mirrodin, this set, they messed up by making artifact lands. Because there's this other ability called Affinity for Artifacts, where a spell costs cheaper depending on how many artifacts you have out. And if you have to play the other artifacts first to get the thing, it's one story. But if your lands are counting as the artifacts at the same time, you get there so quick. And you put out all these spells for free. And apparently the artifact decks that I was playing with when I was like 13 or whatever, or maybe 11 or something, were like still like busted and have a lot of banned cards nowadays in tournaments because they're too good. What is going on there with that noise? It's like an animal noise. It's a cat doing something weird. What are you doing? Did you catch something? What is that? No, I don't think so. What are you doing over there? Sage. He's acting in hunter mode, but I don't think he caught anything. What are you doing, Sage? Okay, we're going to ignore that one for now. Now, the thing about this card here, after that Evolution of Plains story, this thing costs 3 in a Plains. It's a white creature because it's based on costing the white type of mana called Plains. Remember, although he is also a white creature, as far as it looks in terms of social structures, white does not mean like a white person. It means they come from the Plains type of resource. This just happens to be human soldier, and it happens to be a kind of white looking guy, but that's a coincidence that the white card is a human white looking guy. Normally it just means they come from the white type of mana. But this thing costs us 4 to get it out. We don't care about its attacking and defending ability. They already have a thing where they can't attack or defend the first turn. Well, they can defend. They can't attack the first turn they come out unless they have an ability called haste. Although on some of these old cards, they didn't invent haste right away. So a lot of the old cards instead say, like, this card can attack on the first turn it came out. Or say, like, some reference a thing called summoning sickness, I think. That's at least in the official rules that they say, This does not have summoning sickness, was the old way of phrasing that. Because they used to call it summon something. You see how right now it just says creature dash something? They used to call it a summon this. Because in the like story part of it, you are like one of the planeswalkers. Not this type of planes. Planes. Plain. That's part of why that one card that blocks Planeswalk is so bad. We'll talk about Great Wall someday. Worst card ever. I didn't finish that story earlier, but if you have to pick a worst card ever, it's probably the one called Great Wall. Because it's like 5 cards with what's called Planeswalk using this type of planes. They were dumb that they made an important thing called Planeswalking. That's Plains. And then they made a thing called a Planeswalker that became really important. That's Planes. And then they couldn't do much with the Plains walking ability because the other thing was getting popular and they sound so similar. So like no cards have Planeswalk for this type of planes, and it's a different ability. And so the card that prevents things from having that, called Great Wall, is probably the worst card ever because you don't want a dead card in your deck. Now, here's an example of how old cards used to say summon something for what the creature was. This says like summon Bird Maiden, and instead of like creature / Bird Maiden. So that was because you were summoning them. Now, this thing, we don't care about its power and toughness. We care about its ability. We don't need to tap it, meaning use it up for the turn or whatever. We can just pay whenever we want. 1 plus an extra white, 1 of any type plus 1 that has to be white, to return an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less from our graveyard to our hand. Well, normally you'd need a few things to make a combo like that work, except that we're allowing every card ever, including the awesome Black Lotus. And Black Lotus adds 3 mana of any color for 0. So if I have a Black Lotus I've used to help pay for this, and my Black Lotus is in what I call my graveyard, where we put the dead cards we've already used, then we can pay 2 to get it back, use it for 3, pay 2 to get it back, use it for 3. And it's like beyond a perpetual motion machine, where we have added 1 to the equation each time, so we can keep plugging it in. 2 turns to 3, put in another 2, get 3, put in another 2, get 3. And this is one of those infinite, meaning we have to pick a spot to cap off. We have to tell our opponent, I run this procedure 1,000 times, I have 1,000 mana, or something like that. But a lot of people, casual play, they're like, it's infinite, I have infinite mana. And people know what they mean. Technically, they should say a number, a large number. Now, I have Rayo's number amount of mana. I have tree 3 mana, you could say. Now, here we have a combo that gives us infinite mana once we get this onto the board. Still not perfect. We could still improve the deck idea because this is really hard to do. To have all the pieces of the combo, like, we still need another to deal damage or make them draw or whatever. Everything like double task and do 2 things at once. This thing is sort of single task. What is the cat doing? What are you doing, Sage? I hope he didn't catch something. He's acting all huntery. Okay, we'll see. Now, our win condition is now going to be a card that also helps us draw. Many of our other cards were Ancestral Recall, helped us draw a lot. And we're going to put one that costs X. Oh no, Brainstorm's not the one I meant. Where's the one I want? What's Brain Geyser? So this, we can make ourselves draw some cards. X is a variable. If I need a certain amount of cards and I get one of these, I'm putting 2 in my demo deck possibly, or however many fit, and let us always win. I draw a certain amount of cards. More overpriced than our Ancestral Recall. But once I'm ready, when I have one of these, I have to make sure not to use them all before this. I have to set it up so that can't happen. I can make the opponent draw tree 3 amount of cards. And, if the opponent draws tree 3 amount of cards, they're certain to lose. For those who don't know that large number, because we haven't talked about it quite as much, we'll say Googleplex. We make the opponent draw Googleplex cards. So, now, a lot of good comments. Thank you for all of the chatting and stuff. Someone said, look out behind me in a creepy way. I'm sure you're just joking, but that is kind of spooky. But, so, you got me thinking now, but I'm sure you're just joking. Now, thanks for all the other good comments. And somebody said Collatz conjecture. How do you spell it? Collatz. Now, don't worry if you need to look it up before or not. Feel free to look it up. But I am going to be making my presentation episode about the Collatz conjecture and how it relates to binary dropping within a week. I'm going to be trying to get the combo class episodes out once a week. Sometimes they take me up to 2 weeks because I'm still editing them all myself. But hopefully it'll be a week from now or less. I'll have my Collatz conjecture episode out, which will be my, another one where the first half is like classic thing from math, Domotro style, and the second half is like beyond it. What other questions you may not even know. But if you don't know any of it, you can either wait for my episode or look up Collatz. Some people call it the Collatz conjecture. I think the pronunciation would be closer to Collatz. So Collatz or something like that. I don't know. The Collatz conjecture. So I could talk about these things longer, but I do have to go to a friend's housewarming party. My best friend came back into town from far away, from not even in America. And we will come back to some more live streams before long. I know I've been a little vacant from this channel the past few days compared to how I often do things every day or two. It's been a few days, but we're back. I like doing things here every day or two, so it won't be long before I'm back again. So, love you all. Make sure that you catch the linked in the description newest combo class episode that's all about Beyond Fermat's last theorem. Make sure that you also, if you're bored sometime, watch whatever parts of this stream and last couple streams that you haven't seen. The streams are just some extra bonus stuff that they're not necessarily to have to watch all of right when they drop, like a combo class episode is, because they're pretty long. So you don't always have an hour or two to dedicate on that evening. But you always got my live tab on my channel where these are saved after the fact as videos. If you ever want to, you're falling asleep and you need something podcast-like but more Domotro style, you got all my live tab good to go. I also have been filming shorts, like I said. I still need to upload those, but there will be some more shorts coming before long as well. Now, I love you all. Thank you for joining me, and I will catch you in the next one.